So welcome back, everyone, to the ACE podcast. I'm your host, Darren Joe, and what we do on the show is explore the self-employed creative life and how you can do your best work. I met this week's guest through salsa dancing in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. When I found out that she was a documentary photographer and I saw her photos, I knew I just had to get her on the show. Her name is Nicky Quamina-Woo, and she splits her time between the US, Africa, and Southeast Asia, working on different documentary projects. You know, I always thought that this sort of life, it just seems so romantic. Yeah, you're in some really difficult circumstances, but it just seems like, something they'd make a movie about, being a documentary photographer. And so I wanted to understand what this life is really like and what the trade-offs are that Nicky has had to make from being a commercial photographer and art director in New York City and then choosing this path. I know it's been a while since I've recorded an episode. I've been really hard at work writing a book about living your perfect day. Thanks for forgiving me for being off the air, so to speak, for a few months. But I look forward to sharing that book with you soon. So in the meantime, I hope you enjoy this conversation with the lovely Nicky Woo. Is this the first podcast you've ever been on?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm pumping my fist into the air.
Cutting edge.
So I will give a formal introduction to you. Which it makes me laugh.
That's awesome.
But yeah. I don't know. I feel like I should. So how do you say your middle name?
It's my last name, Quamina.
Quamina.
My mom is Ghanaian Jamaican, and so it's like common Ghanaian last name.
Quamina.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicky Quamina-Woo.
Hey. Well done.
Is a Black and Polynesian documentary photographer who divides her time between Southeast Asia, the African continent, and New York City. And her documentary work explores the effects of trauma within communities.
Yeah.
She's recipient of a number of awards, including the inaugural Reuters Storytelling grant.
Huge.
Wow, baller. For her work on a Tanzania-based project about the intersection of Western medicine and witchcraft. And as an independent, her clients have included CNN, The Washington Post, Human Rights Watch, BuzzFeed, Apple, The Guardian. Wow. A number of amazing publications. So, Nicky, thanks for coming on this ACE podcast. I'm so glad I roped you into doing this.
Absolutely. Me too, actually. I like the real gentle, hey, what are you up to?
What you up to?
Yeah,
what you up to?
Let's hang out with microphones.
Yes.
Perfect.
That's my favorite thing to do. So I saw your photos like on your homepage, nickywoo.com, and your Instagram account.
That's a nice plug. Thanks.
They, you gotta do it. And they grabbed me. They stunned me. Like I was
really kind.
Yeah, I fell in love with your photos.
Thank you.
And so secretly I've been plotting, I got to figure out how to get you on the show and learn about your career. Sure. And how you did all this stuff. So my first question is what does a documentary photographer do? And is that different than being a photojournalist?
Yes. So the differences are documentary people tend to love to stay with the subjects for a little bit longer. So that Tanzania story, I was with them for about 5 months, living with them, whereas photojournalists just pop in if they're covering a fire, right? It's a single event that's happening and then they leave. And they might take a couple portraits on the day or the next day, but they don't stay in for long periods of time.
Got it.
There's less nuance to the images as well.
And so typically a documentary photographer would stay for...
Yeah. Anywhere
depends.
From a day to, 12 hours sitting with someone and talking to them,
yes.
To months. Or some people do long-term projects that are years.
And how did you end up becoming a documentary photographer?
That's a fun story.
What's the journey?
Yeah, I was a commercial photographer, and then I became an art director. I was at Ralph Lauren and Dior and Target Canada, and I was in Kenya on holiday in like December of one year because the industry shuts down for Christmas, and my company folded, like the production, because I was at that point at Target Canada, and Target had decided to close every Canadian store. And so I was art directing and producing, though we shoot in New York. And so like everyone just lost their job. And I was like, why would I go back to New York in the winter? This is terrible. And my old assistant rented out my apartment for me, just handled everything in New York. And then I just cruised around East Africa for like 6 months. I went to climb some volcanoes in the Congo.
How many years ago was this?
That was like 5 years ago. Yeah, like 2015, beginning of 2016. So I just did that, and I just had an iPhone with me, and I just kept taking, and I had stopped, I quit being a photographer in New York because I just didn't connect with people anymore. Mm-hmm. You're on set, there's an art director in your ear telling you how to turn people, how to pose them. It's a machine on some level, right? So I switched into art direction myself, which was much, you got to sit back and just think about the technical aspects and the larger image. And so when I was just hanging out with my iPhone, it was great because I started taking photos that I wasn't necessarily trying to, they weren't for a client. They weren't for anyone else. And it was just things that I found beautiful. And it was right around the time that I started an Instagram account, like no big deal, and just started posting photos that I was taking with my phone. And all of a sudden, like I started getting such a great feedback from art director friends and from photo editors. Like, what are you doing? Like, don't you think you should can I have this photo? Can we use this one? And realized it was exactly what I loved. And I went back to New York for a couple months at the end of that year, and I was like, this is terrible. What am I was at, not J. Jill, Ann Taylor Loft, art directing again, doing production. And I was like, I hate my life. This is fucking terrible. Sorry, hecking terrible. We're not cursing.
It's okay.
Yeah.
We're rated R here.
Right. Excellent.
No
problem. Like on 42nd Street in New York. So there's just tourists and like, big glass building, and you have to get keyed in by the 15 guards through the security. And I just couldn't imagine that being my life anymore, because I just didn't care. Like fashion people, they're really committed to, they imagine that fashion is actually like changing the world. Mm-hmm. And it's not, right? I've been living in villages with no running water and like just so much chaos, but joy every day, that I couldn't do it anymore. And so went back to Tanzania and Kenya with a camera and just kind of started shooting projects on my own. Like, all right, well, I need to create a portfolio, and working on it that way.
So it was that trip to Africa that made you, because it wasn't so hard for you before, right? To be in New York doing what you were doing.
Yeah.
Or had it built up over a while?
Well, I had always been freelance. So I assisted for years with photographers and that kind of thing. And so you have enough down days that it's fine. Like it's not so chaotic. I taught at Parsons School of Design for a bit. Wow. You do other things, so you're not going to work 9 to 5. And then that last year I was, every day at work, and I was like, this is not it at all. Like people just do this. Like both of my parents are artists. All of my family members are like artists. And so I was like, wait, what? Like people just go to work every day from 9 a.m. to 6 o'clock at night forever. And then you get 2 weeks of holiday? No. Like what? Yes. It made no sense to me. Yeah,
and so you went back to, you were in Senegal or when
I went back, I went back to Tanzania. Yeah. Like Tanzania. In Zanzibar.
In Zanzibar.
It's the most perfect beach, white sand, no dirt. It's a really small conservative Muslim community. Women all wear hijab. But then there's this small European collective because they kite surf. So there's still parties and restaurants in this one part of the beach. It's lovely. So you get to live that expat lifestyle where you still have enough of the modern conveniences, but also you get to live with these people, right? Like the local indigenous culture that's from there, and sort of understand their customs. And really, I'm an anthropologist, like at heart. And so, yeah, it was perfect for me for a while.
And then how did this become your thing where you're winning these awards and you're working for Reuters?
Yeah, you just start pitching and figuring it out. Like what? It's so all hook and crook.
How did you do it? Like,
I just started. I would see grant opportunities opening up on like Facebook, like, and so I would just start. Wow. I kept applying for them, and I was chilling on the beach most of the day. So like, I'm going to take 3 hours every day and work on these grants, and that kind of thing. And they just ask you a couple questions, and you think about stories and start to understand what crafts a story that will both interest you enough that you can stay with it long term, but also get other people to be interested in it, right? So if I'm telling you about a story about, I don't know, making pens, you're bored. I'm bored. That's not going to sell. No one wants to read that. And really start to understand like what it is that journalists don't make very much money, actually, right? And so, right?
I don't know.
No, absolutely, you don't. And so you're doing it because you actually care, and it's not about celebritydom. And because obviously I worked with tons of celebrities and fashion models and that kind of thing, and that isn't necessarily what motivates me. Especially as you get older, you recognize like, so what? Like, I don't need a bigger apartment or more clothes. Like, it just doesn't mean anything to me, past a certain point, certainly. And so the journalism, you're doing projects that fascinate me in particular. Like, I want to know all about these people's lives. And so you slowly have to figure out what is going to make other people care about that, right? Like, you can't just show someone sitting in a chair. Like, what is amazing about them and what's beautiful about them? And you get to translate that for a larger audience. So that, and for me, it's about empathy and like how to connect people. Like, I imagine that's why the world is filled with so much chaos, is because it's really easy to shut everyone else out and only think about yourself. Yeah. And so the images become a way to try and get people to connect and see the beauty of everyone else.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have so many questions for you on that topic itself, but I want to ask about, you mentioned it's also not only finding projects and subjects that you love and that you care about.
Yeah.
But it's also, making sure the viewer, it's meaningful for the viewer too, or it's impactful on the viewer. So, and you said, you have to slowly figure that out. So could you
elaborate?
Slowly figuring that out?
Yeah, absolutely.
What has that process been for you?
It's been actually really slow.
You're in a new field, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fashion and celebrity photos, it's about lighting, right? Especially with celebrity, you're with them for an hour max. You have to light it in such a way that it feels new to the audience. Whereas, it's basically like satellite. Like, you're just popping in there, lighting. You think about lighting before you get there. You figure out what their faces look like, how to, turn them to the right angles. And with journalism, when I first started taking photos, I was really centered on what it looks like. And especially with the Reuters grant, like, you work with an editor on the, whatever project you pitch. For me, it was witchcraft and Western medicine and how those two things come together in Tanzania. And so I was photographing certain things, and the editor just kept talking to me like, I see what's happening, but I don't feel what's happening. And it's a lot of people explaining to you why it's not good enough, right? Because I'm like, it's pretty. You're not looking for pretty, you're looking for beautiful, like, and what that distinction is, like how to connect emotionally through your photograph.
The soul of the photograph.
Yeah, absolutely. Of the people that you're talking to, like why you think that they're beautiful, so that you can share that with someone else, and like the mood. Yeah, how to photograph mood, I guess. And editing is the same way, like you're sequencing it in such a way that you bring the viewer in with the first image, and you bring them through the story in a really sort of loose narrative so that they can follow it and understand. And, the same thing when you see a documentary film, like a 10-minute, 20-minute, like how you're editing is how people connect.
You're pursuing your own projects, but how do you get into this network where you're getting pitches to do certain sort of work? Right? Because there's both, right?
Yeah, there's absolutely both. I think the way it's been explained to me is that you choose a region. So I had been choosing East Africa. That's, my home. And then after about 4 years, I realized I couldn't live there long term. But so because I had an Instagram following in East Africa, I was living in a place where there weren't that many other photographers who were shooting the type of stuff I was shooting. And so an NGO, international NGO, what's the other word for NGO? Like development. Nonprofit development people. They always need photos of their farming, because they send money to farmers and that kind of thing. And so we follow up that way. And slowly they talk to each other.
Right. And do you know anyone plugged into that network of
absolutely
organizations that need photos?
Absolutely. Which is good. And it's a much easier market, I have to say, than Southeast Asia, because there's not that many people who have the same kind of savvy.
Yeah.
Obviously not if they're from a village, that kind of thing, but they don't think of art in the same kind of ways, in terms of photographically, that will work for the West.
Right.
And so I just switched my market about a year ago to Southeast Asia, a year and a half. And it's harder here because everyone has the same sensibility as the West in terms of they understand what the frame is, they can afford the cameras. So it's definitely been, and I don't speak, let's say, Vietnamese, or I speak a little Bahasa Indonesian, but not great. And so, it's definitely a harder shift here versus there. And for me, I'm more emotionally connected to East Africa. I'm not East African, but they're so beautiful inherently, in a way that's taken a little more time because, we live in big cities here.
Has it been hard for you to survive as an independent journalist?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I do want our audience to hear about that. I mean, the difficulties of it, or maybe doubts you've had along the way?
Definitely. Generally because pitching is really hard. You pitch to public, you find a story you like, you pitch to a publication, and 40 publications just ignore you. You're like, no, I wrote this really long, perfectly crafted email.
Wow. Yeah.
And then you're like, no, they don't. I think that means
or
they
you don't
like
hear from them.
They just ghost you. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's tough.
And then someone will say, yeah, it's a good story, but it's not right for us right now because of the climate in America, or whatever that is. And so you're constantly facing rejection, which is nice about grants. And I think the journalism community in general is very strong in the sense that because we don't make any money, the network, you can grow within that network very quickly. Whereas in fashion or editorial in the States, you could work for 15 years and no one knows you, no one cares who you are.
Right.
Because you're making a lot more cash.
Yeah.
Whereas in this field, there's always especially with COVID, there's been so many talks that I've been on, how to market yourself with Photoville. Nat Geo was giving a talk, and everyone is invited. There's a women's womenphotograph.com. It's just women worldwide who are photographers, and you have to be able to get in. You have to be shooting for 3 years.
Yeah.
Authority Collective, Diversify Photo. There's all of these groups to help us get grants and that kind of thing. Yeah. So for cash, I do pitch grants more often, which augments publication.
But would you say you trade your life now? Pitching for grants, working on your own projects, but sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't. And pursuing this clearly meaningful work to you versus the stability and great salary, I'm sure, of your previous life.
Yeah. I think it's different for everyone, and it's definitely not to denigrate that universe. And I tell this to my students. I think that you find out what works for you. I personally am really interested in learning all the time. And once you live in one city for a certain amount of time and it's your culture, after a while, you're not learning anything. You're like, oh, that person looks like this. I know that clique. I know that other crew. It just wasn't quite enough for me. So moving to different cultures, there's such a steep iron, right? It's a slow learning process. That's incredible. So that I don't think I could change. I go crazy. But I would like to shift into more filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, so that at least you're with news crews or with other people for 2 weeks. It's not just you pitching. Like, that would be really nice. Like, it does get a little bit lonely when it's just you.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I just saw this bombing or whatever it is, and it's just you, and no one can understand what you're talking about. She's like, oh yeah, that's cool. It's not like, it's, you know, to have someone else to share that with would be incredible. So I'm looking forward to that.
Because, you know, when I think of like your work and I see your pictures, and, you know, everyone, NickyWoo.com, check them out. But, you know, you've been in some tough places, like tough situations, the Easter Sunday bombing in Sri Lanka, heroin ports, I mean, on and on, like tough places.
No,
but I want to actually ask you about that. I want to talk about this idea of how you're able to get in close, because the camera is a very obtrusive tool.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really.
So, I mean,
yeah, it really
I have, like, you know, these questions. It's like place, people, and the photo itself. But like the place, how are you getting in with farmers or into a dope house or, you know, these place of Quranic faith healers, like Easter Sunday the bombing that you were at, and unfortunately, like all that stuff. How do you enter that space with the camera?
Access. Yeah, it depends. In Sri Lanka, Sri Lankans are very open people. They absolutely invited me in and asked me to shoot, right? Like, one woman, she was screaming her husband was being taken from her home. And in Sri Lanka, they do a 3-day burial, or 3 days there's a viewing in the house, but most people were so maimed that they had to be, you know, gauzed up, but they still did it. And then your entire neighborhood, all your friends and family come to your house, and then whatever he was being viewed in is basically a casket, and then they close that casket and carry it through the streets. And then your entire neighborhood carries the coffin to the church first for a blessing, and then to the actual cemetery. And people would just say, yes, it's absolutely fine to come into the house, stay with me, you can put your camera in my face, because they wanted the world to know about this terrible thing that happened to them. Which, it was so surprising. I didn't expect that. Whereas in East Africa, partly because where I've been living as a Muslim community, it's a very closed community. And so I went for about a month and a half to these Quranic meetings sort of every day, and I would just sit there, and at first no one would let me photograph, and then I started recognizing, I need to wear hijab, first of all, because they feel disrespected that like my elbows aren't covered, right? Like all of this needs to be covered, as well as my hair. And then I would just go and just have a camera with me and not photograph anything. And I started photographing, it was mostly children, like sick children. So of course, you know, there's a veil. And over time, a lot of the same parents would come back, mothers would come back over and over. And so they sort of got used to me and decided that it was okay that I shoot. But it took a while. It was many months of just sitting and hanging out, and I was in tears a bunch of times. Yeah, it was a lot for sure. But other places are easier.
Okay, so it's just really dependent, and you just have to make yourself like part of that community. Yeah. You have to earn your stripes. You can't just come in there
and rock up. Yeah, depending on the country.
Because I'm sure your instinct is to do that.
You
right?
know,
I mean, just like you can see the perfect photo. Yeah. I would think if I was a photographer, I'm not, but oh gosh, I got to get this.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Maybe. You know, interesting. I think this is interesting actually about being a photographer of color. Years ago, I was living on a White Mountain Apache reservation in Arizona, and there's a point where it was like a sunrise dance. So when the women first menstruate, they get this dance basically. And so they can't touch themselves for, I think, 3 days. It's been a lot of years. I think for 3 days, but they're bathed and fed and clothed by their family members. And then there's an entire like circle of people dancing around them. They can't eat any food. They're covered in mud. Their mothers and grandmothers make their outfits for this dance for years beforehand into this transition. And I was with maybe like 15 other people one other person was of color, and the rest were just like regular white kids from the States. And they would get up and start dancing, and both me and the other woman of color were like offended. Like, this is not our culture. Like, how dare you and no one's invited you to dance. Like, that's not okay. And they would, especially because they're doing it badly, and they're just like, ho, 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 whoop, whoop, whoop. Like,
right.
oh my, I was like in shock. And so I think the same thing is true when I go into other people's cultures. Like, I wait for them to invite me in. Like, I don't just force my camera in. And every once in a while I have, like, traveling through Ethiopia and you see something cool on the side of a road. Right. But those kids, they're such gangsters. Like, they'll pick up rocks and throw those shits at you. And you're like, whoo, okay, sorry, my bad.
Yeah, my bad.
Cool, I'm going to put this camera down, whatever. Yeah. So now it's harder to shoot. And then we have so many, which is probably why, like, so many, it used to be mostly older white men who ran the documentary and photojournalism community, especially internationally. And I think it's because they get this respect immediately and are very quickly allowed in, definitely not in Muslim communities, but in like other communities. And I could see it, like the BBC was shooting near me in Sri Lanka, and one of the ministers came in and he only greeted like the two older white guys who had cameras. There was like a Sri Lankan there. There was like no one else got any time with him, but he was like, oh, you guys must be the ones, right? Which is about the Western and, you know, our colonization, that kind of thing. So yeah, no, I go slowly, personally. Wrap that up for you, sorry.
Yeah.
Go off in a tangent.
But this is a very important thing for you to increase, like, the representation.
Yeah. Well,
challenge the stereotype of the photographer. Of the Western male photographer, right? And
I mean, I don't know if I'm necessarily trying to challenge a stereotype as much as I think that you should go into someone else's community with respect. Yeah, which is how I want someone to come into my community, right? Like, don't just rock in and be like, here's my camera, boom. Whatever, you're from some small village, I'm everything because I'm from this city. Like, that's disgusting, right? Like, we don't want to keep promoting that.
And, you know, with your subjects, is it the same thing to gain their trust? Because, you know, some of your portraits, they're all of them, they're very intimate, they're very telling, you know, and you have, you know, kids, farmers, fishermen, prostitutes, you're in their homes. Yeah. Like, that's, how do you get that access? Same thing?
Yeah, same thing. Like, you just hang out with them and let them vote, and, you know, sometimes they relax into it, sometimes they don't, and then you just keep going back until you feel like you have it. I mean, I think the hard part for me that I didn't recognize before is that you then form these lifelong relationships that I didn't expect or ask for really sometimes. I know a woman, I was on a panel with her. Her name is Sarah Stack, and I think she works out of South Africa a bunch. And she says in this one community, she goes like 3 months a year. She does everything for that community now. Like, families call her and they need her to drive them to the hospital. Oh, my kid is sick and he needs this. Oh, this is happening with the school. Like, and because they consider you part of the community, you're all in, like, you're a family member, which is a lot of pressure. You're like, no, wait. I don't know if I could take all 5 of the kids to ice cream today or to the fair. Like, so that's been interesting. So I have a pretty big family now.
It must be hard to leave these places too.
Sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's perfectly fine. Yeah, really. Like the heroin addicts, I would run into them in the streets.
I don't understand. Like, terrible. That series in particular, I was just thinking, how did you get into a place like this, and didn't you feel unsafe? And
I had a fixer with me. So a friend of mine, I just asked a bunch of people, which is the great thing about living in small communities. Everyone knows everyone, right? Like, they've lived there all their lives, and it's, you know. And so I asked a bunch of people if they had any relatives that were addicted to heroin in this small island. And eventually a friend was like, yeah, actually, I do know someone. And so I interviewed him, and then over time he brought me with him. But because I knew his like nephew, I was sure that he wouldn't rob me.
Right. There's a third relationship, or
absolutely, like, which is how you go in, right? Because for definitely the guys could have robbed. There were definitely some moments that were a little sketchy, but mostly more interestingly, it was about their sense of faith that was really shocking. Like I was with like 6 dudes shooting up and in like a alleyway between some houses in the middle of Ramadan. And my head was covered. I was wearing a hijab. I was wearing like a long thing. My neck, you couldn't see my neck, but my dress, the sleeves didn't come all the way down to my wrists. And at some point they started cajoling me, like, what is wrong with you? Like, it's Ramadan. Like, why are you, I'm like, you are sucking a glass pipe. Like, what are you talking? But their sense of like masculinity and like what's right for me and I was like, this is fascinating. I don't know how to photograph that, but like deeply enmeshed sexism. Dope. Cool.
And would a project like that, like, let's take that project in particular, was that commissioned, or did you just, you got a tip and you're like, I want to enter this world?
This is
like the thing. This is what I'm trying to understand about you, Nicky.
Sorry. No, it's whatever is interesting to you. Like, you're the photographer, you're the documentarian. So if there's something that you learn about in a community and it's like, wow, that's really interesting, I didn't expect that. So in this really conservative archipelago, I did not expect there to be heroin addicts. Like, why would there be heroin addicts? Like, people don't, right? And so, one, because it's a porous border, basically, and so, like, getting through the European route from Afghanistan, that kind of thing, is much more patrolled nowadays. So drug runners are going the opposite all the way around. And so, okay, great. So now there's drugs. It's cheaper. And also a lot of like Italian tourists come through and they're doing heroin. And so they offer it to like their local guide, like, oh, do heroin with me. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And most people said that they didn't realize it would be so addicting. Like, everyone's lost their wives, they've lost their families, which I was shocked by, just because, you know, so everyone's so buttoned up. There's no pork on the island. There's no, you know, there's no skin. The kids are covered. They go to to like Islamic school every day. Yeah.
And is language ever a barrier?
Definitely.
Because you got a camera. You don't speak the same language.
Yeah, for sure. In Zanzibar, it's okay because I can speak a bit of Swahili, enough to like get by. And then I had someone with me, like the uncle who was with me, and he spoke some English. Right. In Sri Lanka, everyone speaks English, no problem. But in Senegal, I don't speak French well. And it's French and Wolof mostly, but yeah, both those languages for me, I don't do that well at all. So I actually, like, the first day, usually you just meet someone randomly who's walking around, and so it was like a tour guide, some like older 50-year-old tour guide who was like, oh yeah, if you need me to show you like the sites in this village, it was about coastal erosion. And a couple of days later, I was like, oh wait, I should go talk to that guy. Yeah. Hey, can I pay you to like come around with me and translate? And he was like, yeah, cool, whatever. So then he became my fixer. And you know, we used Google Translate a lot, but still, it's fine.
I mean, is it as romantic as it sounds?
No, it's terrible sometimes. Terrible. Like, you meet, there was a 6-year-old girl who, the images aren't up on my site, because I couldn't, she was raped, and her mother brought her to this like one-stop clinic, and the entire time her mom is berating her for being raped, because it's a Muslim place, and the little girl was playing in her front yard, and a man walked by and he was like, little sister, can you tell me where the mosque is? And this little girl was like, oh, it's over there. And he's like, no, sister, physically show me. So she goes in the house, gets her hijab, comes back out, shows him. They find her in the bushes many hours later. For sure, the mother and the community was like, she clearly asked for it. Like, she wasn't wearing her hijab the whole time. She was
that's brutal.
Disgusted. Yeah. Like I know too much about humanity at this point. I don't think I needed to know. Curiosity sometimes getcha. But then I moved to like lovely places like this to try and get away from that level of depravity. Yeah. Because it's too much, for sure. Which is why when we dance, I find it like
Nothing on your mind.
Well, you kind of have to lean into the joy, right? Like, because there's the rest of it isn't necessarily joyful. So you lean into what really makes you happy, and there's a lot less bullshit and people who talk nonsense or like gossiping the entire time. Like, I just don't care.
Yeah.
Like, do you know that I saw a child that was dismembered last month? Like, no. Let's talk about deeper things.
How do you see your purpose? You know, I know that's a big question. I mean, as a documentary photographer, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you see like such an awful thing. Yeah. You see such wonderful things too, and you're traveling to all these places. You're meeting all sorts of people. Some things hit, some things don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
What keeps you? What fuels you to do the work?
Motivated. I think for everyone it's a little bit different. For me, I think that documentary creates empathy, and it doesn't really change the world, as it's been pointed out. But there are some times that it does. This wonderful man, his name is Ron Haviv. He is a photographer, and he was just giving like a talk at a like a seminar thing, and he photographed a lot of like in the former Yugoslavia, like when Milosevic is pulling out and like the killing of all the Muslims, and the soldiers would rape someone and then shoot them in the head. Or if it was just a man, they would just bring them outside and shoot them in the head. And Ron was standing there, and the soldiers had a gun to his head, and they said, "Don't photograph." And so he didn't. And he said after he went back stateside for like months, he was just so depressed, right? Because he witnessed this, but he didn't document it. And he made a promise to himself that if he was ever in that situation again, he would take the photo, right? Because that's the choice. And he said a month later, he found himself back there and the gun was still to his head, and he took the photos. But his images put 7 different war criminals away because they were able to use those photos in the tribunals, in the trials. And like, amazing. Really. Like he is also like the warmest, kindest. It doesn't matter if he's talking to a waitress or a shoe shine boy. He is so filled with love and warmth and presence because he's seen such terrible things that it forces you to see the beauty of humanity as well, right? To counteract that or to balance it. And I think that that's the point for me anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would make the same choice in the same way, but that the fact that it could help save people is amazing to me.
Yeah. How do you feel with, like, I mean, clearly your Instagram account, that helped you land a lot of gigs. Yeah, absolutely. But how do you feel about being a photographer right now when everyone has a camera and can take pictures and we're almost drowned in images and, that's a big question. And it's hard to parse the truth of a photo.
For sure.
I mean, right? Like, what was the context of,
absolutely.
So many questions. Maybe
the only part that's difficult, I was living in Bali for a bit just to sort of, relax. And you'll go to a place that's beautiful and it's overrun with tourists who don't actually connect with the place. They're just popping in to a photo and then jumping and like, oh my God, we're in Bali. And they're really sacred places sometimes. Or they go to the beach and you're like, oh, this amazing beach is white sand. Oh, now there's 27 girls in bikinis posing with potty lips. What's that pursing lips thing with the potty duck lips? Duck lips, sorry.
We call them potty lips.
I know. Yes, coined. On the beach, and you're like, what are you doing? Go swimming, chick. Like, get it. Like, So that part kind of grosses me out, but it's just so commercial. So that part is problematic. And also the fake news aspect of it. I went out with someone for a second and he was like, yeah, but it's all fake news. I'm like, no. So in journalism, if you do anything to a photograph, if you remove hair, a piece of trash in the corner, and your publication finds out, you're barred from photography. Like, you'll never work again as a journalist. And so 100%. That is not, it can't be fake news. Like images can't be changed. So certainly not fake news. And I think that is problematic for me when people are just like, oh, it's all nonsense in the paper and like, all that's fake. It's not.
Right.
That's a bigger
And you just,
issue.
do you believe to kind of just let your work speak for itself? Like, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, so many photos.
Yeah.
And yours
So many
grabbed
photos.
me. It's like it's there's a feeling.
Yeah,
comes
it's an
through.
instant connection that you should have with the world, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's the hard part in like finding things that are that enigmatic, that will actually, you know, that's new, something different. That's the hardest part.
What's your practice surrounding that? Do you have a practice surrounding that?
No.
Just take a lot of pictures?
Well,
right? Like,
after a while, your eye becomes more discerning. So, like, the difference between, like, a 5-year-old kid getting dressed or us in our 30s, right? Like, you know that you don't wear a striped shirt with, like, stripes going the opposite way with pants with then a, like, neon this. And, you know, you recognize that doesn't make sense visually.
Right.
And the same thing happens over time if you're a photographer. Like, you recognize what doesn't work. And so you try to, like, oh, I need to look at my entire frame and see that there's someone walking into the frame that side, or that there's this light flare or whatever it is. And especially because I travel so much or move around so much, I know what's kind of different from a photo that someone else took.
Yeah.
I'm starting to. I'm getting better at it slowly, right? Because it's different than being just in studio, which is who I was before.
Which means you got to look at a lot of photos.
Yeah, I look at a lot of
Right?
photos.
And you have your heroes too.
Definitely.
I've seen, on some. We'll link to how you can learn more about Nicky and some of her interviews. On Reuters. Geez, The Guardian. Actually, can I ask you about a quote or two?
Sure. You found some quotes. Okay, cool.
That's what I do. I find quotes. This was really interesting when during the Reuters grant, right? And you said that you have to gain people's trust and forge relationships with them, and so that they welcome you into their lives to tell their stories. And you said initially I had a really hard time because I was worried I might take more than I was giving.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you could see that through the photograph?
And not through the photograph, but in the moment, I felt like a thief. Like,
because this is a constant concept I've seen, in your quotes, like you got to, shoot what you love and make sure your heart is in the right place, right? And into the types of images you're shooting. And like this idea of taking, giving, and the love that you're feeling for the subject, and that somehow it comes through in this,
frame.
Two-dimensional
frame.
picture.
Yeah. I mean, that's the dream, right? That's what we're trying to do. Yeah, I think for photographers, that's the dream. Like, you want to be able to translate for the rest of the world. I mean, so we live in Vietnam, and when you talk to friends who live in LA or California or just the States, trying to translate how incredible Vietnam is to them, like they don't know what you're talking about.
It's one of my biggest challenges for someone who has never been here.
Absolutely.
Like, how can I convey this?
Exactly. And so partly you could take like tourist photos of buildings, but how to get the feeling of being here into an image so that they start to be able to understand that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, which is hard.
Tell me the secret of that.
Yeah.
So
It's really hard.
On the podcast, is it?
It's totally hard.
No, you can't distill it to 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think if you, maybe actually, if you are really feeling something, like you need to understand composition and light and that kind of thing. So once you get past the technical portions, if something moves me in a moment, then if I take a photo of it, sometimes it translates. Oh. It's not rock. It's not hard. I mean, conceptually, it's not hard. In practice, it's difficult for sure. Hi. You make good faces.
I make good faces.
Yeah.
All right, audience, you should know I make good faces. Okay, I think that's I guess one more question I had is, I noticed you're a member of, APJD, Women Photograph, Diversify Photos, Authority Collective. Clearly you see this need to join these groups and contribute to them and like elevate each other.
Yeah.
Like, what is the role of this in independent journalism, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel...
So all of those groups are of either women or people of color. And so there has been a big push in the last like 5 to however many years of about 20% of bylines in the world are female. Like, wow. Editors consistently give the work to men, even though there's women who are also living in those communities who want to photograph, as well as they'll give it to Europeans or Americans versus like someone who's Syrian or Afghani, who's living in those communities, who knows how to photograph, who takes a good photograph.
Speaks the language, like it's their culture, that kind of thing. So there's a big push currently to try and get more people from those communities in. And so Women Photograph is just a listing of all the women photographers around the world and it lists you by region. So if I'm an editor at the Washington Post and I need someone to photograph in Thailand, this is a list of all the people women who are photographing in Thailand, and you get to see their work and it links to their websites. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So in the same thing with Diversify Photo, like it's run by an authority collective, like some New York Times photo editors of color who also want journalism and documentary to be much more inclusive. Yes.
Especially when they're covering like the first black person to photograph a Vogue cover in like 115 years or whatever was like last year. The first time ever. Crazy, yeah, absolutely. Like there's no reason, but editors consistently just photograph or hire people who they know. And so there's a problem with that, right? Yeah. And so that's why I proudly list.
Yeah.
Old. These are our groups, Last
question is like, so a lot of our listeners, they want to pursue this life that you have chosen the last 5 years with all its ups and downs. They want to be creative, self-employed people. So what did I not ask you? What did I just was the big blind spot here in this talk about succeeding in that sort of life, that lifestyle for you?
I maybe not a blind spot, and this is, I think, something that I talk about with kids. And a professor said this to me when I was in school and like pursuing fashion, and he was like, "Yeah, you can shoot it, but it's not really who you are, and is this what you love?" And I was like, "Whatever, like, shut up, dude." Fast forward 10 years, and I'm like, "Oh no, I totally don't love it. It's clear in my work that that's not the thing that I love, but it's, there's much more money in it. It's a quicker turnover. You just learn tech and then you're fine, that kind of thing." But I don't care about what this season's fashions are. Not really. Like, aesthetically it's interesting, but not truly. Not the way that I care about anthropology and community and culture. And so, and even hanging out with people from each of those groups, it's very clear that I'm not a fashion person, like as soon as I talk to them, right? We're talking about different things. But when I hang out with journalists, conversation can go on for days because they're also fascinated by the same things. And I think that that's the biggest thing, is you should figure out if you're in the creative field, like photography or filmmaking, the things that really, really turn you on versus this is a great career track. And there's lots of people who are bankers first and then realize that's not what they wanted to do, and that's fine. And, it's all of our journeys, but it would help circumnavigate that, those years wasted, or not wasted, but, spent.
Thank you so much, Nikki.
Absolutely. It's been so fun. Thanks. Go team.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Just getting a glimpse into, what this world has been. And there's so much more, but if you want to learn more, you know where to go. But yeah, thanks again for coming on the show.
Definitely. Happy days.
Thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoyed that episode, press subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. It helps more people discover the show. I sincerely appreciate it, and if you want to join the conversation and get some goodies, get on our email list. Go head over to upstartist.tv/ACE. That's ASE, and I hope to see you there.